They told us the Americans were different from us. They said if we were captured, we would be treated poorly and kept far from home. I believed every word. My name is Miyuki Nakamura, and I was a military nurse serving the Imperial Japanese forces in the Pacific. When our transport ship was damaged near the Marshall Islands in early 1944, I thought my life was changing forever. Not because of the accident, but because of what would come after. We were rescued by American sailors. I expected to be separated from everyone I knew. Instead, they wrapped us in blankets and treated us with respect. Within hours, 12 of us, all women, nurses, wives of officers, and civilian workers, were being transported to Hawaii. I couldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, but from uncertainty. I had heard stories. Everyone had. But now I was about to discover the truth for myself. When the plane landed at Hickam Field, I closed my eyes. What would happen next? But then the doors opened and I saw something unexpected. A woman in a white uniform. An American nurse. She smiled. Not a mean smile, just a smile. She said something in English I couldn't understand, but her hands were gentle as she helped Harumi down the steps. Harumi was barely 19, pregnant, and trembling. I wanted to protect her, but I was too weak. We hadn't eaten properly in days. My arm was injured from debris. I could barely stand. They loaded us into a truck, but not what I expected. It was clean. There were seats, no chains, just 2 soldiers in front and that same nurse sitting with us in the back. She kept checking on Harumi, placing a hand on her belly, nodding with concern. She pulled out a canteen and offered Harumi water. Real water. Clean water. Harumi looked at me, asking permission with her eyes. I nodded. What choice did we have? Harumi drank, and the nurse smiled, encouraging her to drink more. I didn't understand why she was being so kind. The truck stopped in front of a large white building. A hospital, Tripler Army Medical Center. I had seen hospitals before. Ours in the Pacific were crowded and difficult. This place looked clean. Too clean. The building was massive, gleaming white in the Hawaiian sun. Palm trees lined the entrance. I could hear birds singing. We were led inside, and I braced myself. But instead, we were taken to a ward, a private ward, with beds. Real beds, with white sheets. Crisp, clean, white sheets that looked freshly prepared. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to understand what I was seeing. Sachiko grabbed my arm, her fingers gripping tightly. "This is unusual," she whispered in Japanese. "Be careful. Stay alert." I wanted to believe her caution made sense. But then the nurse, the one from the plane, came over to me. She pointed to a bed and gestured for me to sit. I didn't move. My legs felt uncertain. She smiled again. That same kind smile, and gently guided me by the elbow. Her touch was light, not forceful. I could have stepped away if I wanted to, but I was so tired, so weak. I sat. She kneeled down, carefully rolling up my sleeve to examine my injured arm. I flinched, expecting rough treatment, but she paused, her eyes meeting mine. There was no anger, no judgment, just focus. Professional concern. She called over another nurse, a younger woman with kind eyes, who brought a tray of medical supplies. The older nurse began speaking to me in English, her tone calm and clear. She pointed to the supplies, then to my arm, then made motions showing what she would do. She was explaining the procedure, like I was a patient, not a prisoner. The younger nurse began carefully cleaning my arm. It was sore, but she worked gently. When I gasped, she immediately paused, apologized in English, and worked even more carefully. I watched as they cleaned my arm. The older nurse, I would later learn her name was Dorothy, used a solution to prevent infection. It stung, but they worked with care, step by step. Dorothy kept talking to me in English. I didn't understand the words, but her tone was calm, reassuring, like she was explaining what she was doing, like I deserved to understand my own treatment. The younger nurse applied healing cream, then wrapped my arm in clean, fresh bandages. New material. They were using new, clean supplies on me. A Japanese woman. When they finished, Dorothy patted my shoulder gently and smiled. The younger nurse brought me a small cup with medicine and a glass of water. I stared at the medicine. Dorothy seemed to understand my worry. She picked up one of the pills, showed me it was real, and made a swallowing motion, then pointed to my arm. Medicine. For healing. She was telling me it was medicine to help my arm get better. Sachiko made a sound of disapproval from across the room, but I looked at my arm. It needed help. I took the medicine and swallowed it with the water. Dorothy nodded approvingly and moved on to check on the other women. I sat on that bed waiting, but nothing bad happened. Just the steady beat of my heart and the strange, clean feeling of the room around me. That first night, I couldn't sleep. None of us could. We lay in those clean beds, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything. Harumi cried quietly, her hands resting on her belly. Sachiko kept watch by the window, her mind full of thoughts. But no one came to hurt us. The only person who entered our ward was a night nurse, an older woman with gray hair and a gentle face. She walked through quietly, checking on each of us, adjusting blankets, refilling water pitchers. When she got to Harumi, she paused, noticing the tears. She sat down on the edge of the bed and took Harumi's hand. She said something soft in English, something I couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. Care. Kindness. She stayed there for several minutes, just holding Harumi's hand, until the crying stopped. Then she patted Harumi's belly gently, smiled, and moved on. I watched this moment with wonder. This wasn't what I expected from the stories I had heard. In the morning, they brought us food. Not small portions, but eggs, toast with butter, fresh fruit, and milk. I stared at the tray in surprise. This was wonderful food. Sachiko refused to eat at first. "Be careful," she said, but I was so hungry. The smell of the food was wonderful. My stomach felt empty. I took a bite of the toast. It was soft, warm, real butter. I ate slowly, enjoying every bite. The eggs were seasoned with salt and pepper. The fruit was sweet and fresh. I ate everything on my tray, and when I finished, I felt stronger than I had in weeks. One by one, the others began to eat too. Even Sachiko, though she was still uncertain. She picked at the food carefully, taking small bites. But there were no problems. By the end of breakfast, even she had finished her plate. Over the next few days, we began to understand the routine. Every morning at 7, the nurses would come in, greet us warmly in English, and begin their work. They checked our health, took our temperature, looked at our blood pressure, and checked our bandages. They spoke to us gently, even though we couldn't understand them. They used hand gestures, pointed to pictures, and showed us what they were doing. Dorothy seemed to be in charge. She was older, maybe in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back neatly. She moved with authority, but always with kindness. She checked on Harumi constantly, bringing her extra pillows, making sure she was comfortable. She measured Harumi's belly, listened to the baby's heartbeat with a special tool, and made notes. Professional, thorough, caring. One morning, Dorothy brought in a wheelchair and gestured for Harumi to sit in it. Harumi looked worried. Where were they taking her? But Dorothy just smiled and made a walking motion with her fingers, then pointed outside. Fresh air. She was taking Harumi outside for fresh air. Sachiko protested loudly in Japanese, but Dorothy ignored the worry, gently helping Harumi into the wheelchair. I stood up, ready to follow and protect, but Dorothy just waved for me to come along. She wheeled Harumi out of the ward, down a long, clean hallway with windows overlooking gardens, and out onto a covered patio. The sun was shining. The air was warm and smelled like flowers. Dorothy positioned Harumi's wheelchair in the shade and sat down on a nearby bench. She pulled out knitting needles and yarn and began to knit, humming softly to herself, just sitting there, keeping Harumi company. I stood nearby, watching carefully, but Dorothy didn't do anything concerning. She just knitted and hummed. After a while, She held up what she was making, a tiny yellow blanket, baby-sized. She pointed to Harumi's belly, then to the blanket, and smiled. She was knitting a blanket for Harumi's baby, for a Japanese baby. I felt something change inside me. The certainty that these people were only interested in harm, because kind people knit blankets for babies. We sat there for almost an hour. Harumi stopped crying, her face tilted toward the sun. For the first time since we had been captured, I saw her feel more peaceful. Just slightly. Just enough. Then one day, everything changed. A new nurse arrived. She walked into our ward and the room went quiet. She was different. Asian. Japanese, I realized with surprise. She had Japanese features, Japanese hair, but she wore an American uniform. A lieutenant's uniform. Sachiko stood up immediately, her face showing strong emotion. "You have turned your back on your people," she said in Japanese. "You wear their uniform. How can you do this?" The nurse stopped, her face calm but sad. She had clearly heard strong words before. She took a breath and responded in perfect Japanese. "My name is Lieutenant Emily Chen," she said. "I was born in California. My parents came from Japan, but I was born in America. I am loyal to the country where I was born, the United States of America. But I am here to help you understand that you are safe." "Safe?" Sachiko said with doubt in her voice. "You serve them. You wear their uniform. How can you tell us we are safe?" Emily didn't step back from the strong words. "I understand your feelings," she said quietly. "I understand that you have heard different things about me. But I'm asking you to look around. Look at how you have been treated since you arrived. Have they hurt you? Have they given you too little food? Have they done any of the things you were told they would do?" Silence. Because she was right. None of those things had happened. "This is a hospital," Emily continued, her voice steady. "You are patients. You will be treated with the same care as any person who needs medical help. That is the direct order of Captain William Foster, the chief medical officer here. He believes in treating all people fairly. He believes that even in difficult times, we don't have to lose our kindness." I wanted to argue. I wanted to hold on to the fear I had been taught, the fear that had kept me strong, but my arm was healing. I could move my fingers without pain. Harumi was feeling better. Her face had healthy color again. She smiled sometimes. We were sleeping in real beds, eating real food, being treated by real doctors and nurses. How could I hold on to fear when I was surrounded by kindness? Over the following weeks, Emily became our helper and translator. She explained the medical procedures in detail, helped us share our needs and concerns. She was patient, never upset, even when Sachiko continued to express doubt. She answered our questions honestly. She told us about life in America, about growing up Japanese in California, about the challenges she faced even from people who looked like her, about how she chose to serve because she believed in showing that people of all backgrounds could work together. Dorothy and the other nurses never treated us unkindly. They joked with each other in English, and though we couldn't understand the words, we could hear the happiness. They smiled at us, brought us magazines with pictures, tried to teach us simple English words. Good morning. Thank you. Water. Please. They brought Harumi special vitamins, special food with important nutrients. They watched her health carefully, checking that everything was going well with her pregnancy. One of the nurses, a young woman named Betty, brought in her own maternity clothes and gave them to Harumi. Clean clothes, comfortable and helpful. Harumi cried when she put them on. Real maternity clothes, not the makeshift wrappings she had been using. One day, Captain Foster himself came to visit. He was tall, with broad shoulders, graying hair at the temples, and a serious face. He wore his uniform neatly, his captain's bars polished and clear. He walked with authority, and I felt nervous. This was the man in charge. He stopped at the entrance to our ward and looked at us with intelligent, kind eyes. Then he spoke, and Emily translated. "Ladies," he said, his voice deep and formal. "I am Captain William Foster, Chief Medical Officer of this facility. I want to make something very clear to you. You are prisoners of war, yes, that is a fact. But you are also human beings. You are also women who have been through difficulty. You are also patients under my care. And while you are under my care, you will be treated with respect and care. That is not something that will change. That is something I have ordered for everyone here. Sachiko looked at him, her face showing strong feeling, her eyes serious. Why? She asked through Emily, her voice direct. Why treat us this way? We are from the other side. Why show us care when you could treat us differently? Foster looked at her for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes. Understanding. Sadness. The look of a man who had seen much difficulty. Because if we stop being kind to defeat those who are unkind, he said slowly, then we have already failed. The moment we forget that every person has value, we lose something important inside ourselves. I have seen what happens when people forget to care about each other. I will not let that happen here. So yes, you are from the other side, but you are also human, and that matters. Those words stayed with me. They were in my thoughts for many days. I thought about the people I had cared for in the Pacific, young people, barely grown, who needed help and comfort. People who had been told they were fighting for something important. I had been taught they were doing something noble. But what if they were just people? What if all of this was just people being kind or unkind to each other? I started watching the nurses more carefully. I watched how they treated each other. How Dorothy would put a hand on Betty's shoulder when she looked tired. How they would share food from home, treats their families had sent. How they would talk about their lives, their hopes, their dreams. They weren't different from us, they were just women doing important work. Just like I had been. One afternoon, Dorothy sat down next to me during her break. She had a cup of warm drink and a tired but happy smile. She said something in English and I shook my head, not understanding. She laughed and pointed to herself. Dorothy, she said clearly. Then she pointed to me, raising her eyebrows in question. Miyuki, I said quietly. Miyuki Nakamura. Miyuki, she repeated, smiling. That's a beautiful name. I didn't know what she said, but Emily, who was nearby, translated. I felt my face become warm, a kind word, from an American nurse. Dorothy pulled out a small photograph from her pocket and showed it to me. A young man in uniform, handsome, smiling. She pointed to the photo, then to her ring finger. Husband, her husband. She said something else, and Emily translated. He's serving far away. I haven't seen him in 2 years. I hope he is safe and will come home. I looked at the photo. Her husband was serving, and here she was, taking care of Japanese women. How did she do it? How did she keep her heart so kind? Dorothy seemed to understand my confusion. She pointed to me, then to the photo, then to her heart. She said something, and Emily translated. We are all just trying to stay safe and get back to the people we love. Harumi went into labor in late May. It was early evening, just after dinner. She gasped, holding her belly, and everything changed in that moment. Sachiko and I immediately went to her, but before we could do anything, Dorothy was there. She had been nearby and had seen Harumi's face. She moved quickly and calmly, calling out to the other nurses. Within minutes, Harumi was in a wheelchair, being moved to a special room. I ran after them, not wanting to leave Harumi alone. Dorothy didn't stop me. She just nodded and pointed for me to follow. They took Harumi to a delivery room. Bright lights, clean sheets, medical equipment ready to help. Dorothy and 2 other nurses worked quickly, getting Harumi comfortable, checking that everything was going well, and watching the baby's heartbeat. Emily arrived and immediately began translating, keeping Harumi calm and informed. Captain Foster was there too, standing by, ready to help if there were any problems. I stood in the corner, watching. I had helped with births before, but never like this. Never with this much equipment, this much care, this much attention. In the places I had worked before, births happened with minimal supplies, and we could only hope everything would be okay. But here they were treating Harumi like she was important, like her baby was important. Harumi cried out, holding tight to the sheets, her face showing how hard this was. Labor was never easy, and this was her first time, and she was afraid. But Dorothy held her hand, speaking to her in English, her voice calm and encouraging. Emily translated, "You are doing wonderfully. You are so strong. Just breathe. The baby is coming. You are almost there." Hours passed. I lost track of time. Harumi pushed and cried and worked hard. Dorothy never left her side. She wiped Harumi's forehead with a cool cloth. She adjusted pillows. She checked that the baby was in the right position. She encouraged and reassured. Betty prepared instruments. Another nurse watched Harumi's health signs. Captain Foster watched the baby's heartbeat monitor, his face serious but calm. And then finally, the baby came. A tiny, crying, perfect little girl. Dorothy caught her, made sure she could breathe well, and the baby's cries filled the room. Strong, healthy cries. Dorothy wrapped the baby in a clean, warm blanket and placed her in Harumi's arms. Harumi stared down at her daughter, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face, her body shaking from the hard work. "She is here," she whispered in Japanese. "We are both here." Emily smiled, translating for the nurses, who all said kind things to Harumi. Dorothy brought formula, clean cloths, a small bed for the baby. She showed Harumi how to feed the baby, how to help her after feeding, how to change her. She was patient, showing each step, making sure Harumi understood. Betty brought tiny baby clothes, soft and clean. Another nurse brought a handmade mobile to hang over the baby's bed, little fabric birds that spun slowly in the air. I watched, amazed. This was the enemy? These women who stayed up all night to make sure a Japanese baby was fed and warm. These women who made toys and brought clothes and smiled at a child whose country was far away. Over the next few days, the nurses took care of baby Akiko. That's what Harumi named her, Akiko, meaning bright child. They took turns holding her, speaking to her in happy voices, making her smile. Dorothy brought in a camera one day and took a photograph of Harumi holding Akiko. She gave the photo to Harumi as a gift, a memory, proof that this moment, this life, had happened. Harumi cried and bowed deeply, thanking Dorothy over and over. Dorothy just smiled and waved it off, like it was something anyone would do. Sachiko finally let down her guard. I found her one evening sitting by the window with tears on her face. I had never seen her cry. Not once. She was always the strong one, the one who didn't show sadness, the one who stayed firm. I sat down beside her, not saying anything, just being there. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I don't understand how they can be so kind. If the situation were different, if they were our prisoners, we would not have treated them this way. You know that. You have seen how our soldiers treat prisoners. You have heard the orders, the harshness, the lack of respect." I didn't have an answer. Because she was right. Our training had taught us that the other side didn't deserve kindness, that prisoners were less important, that we should not show weakness through care. I had been taught these things. I had heard the stories. I had believed them. But these women had shown us kindness. They had shown us that we were important, and it changed everything I thought I knew. "Maybe," I said slowly, "maybe we were wrong about these things. Maybe everything we were taught was not right." Sachiko looked at me, her eyes red and wet, her face showing deep emotion. "If we were wrong about this, what else were we wrong about? What did we sacrifice for? What did all those people give up for?" I had no answer, because I was asking myself the same questions. Months passed. My arm healed completely, leaving only a small mark. Harumi's daughter Akiko grew healthy and strong. She smiled and made baby sounds and grabbed at fingers with her little hands. The nurses continued to help take care of her and love her. We were eventually moved to a different camp, a real prisoner of war camp with fences and guards and buildings for sleeping. But even there, the treatment was nothing like we had feared. We were given work, sewing and washing clothes to keep us busy and helpful. We were given food, enough to be healthy. We were given shelter and medical care when needed. We were treated according to the rules. The rules that Captain Foster had mentioned. There were international agreements about how to treat prisoners, and the Americans followed them. Not perfectly. There were guards who were not as kind. There were moments of sadness and frustration. But there was no system of terrible treatment. No mass problems. No starvation. We were prisoners, yes. But we were alive. We were treated as human beings. But I never forgot those first weeks in the hospital. I never forgot Dorothy's smile, Emily's patience, Captain Foster's words. I never forgot the feeling of clean sheets and real food. I never forgot watching American nurses care for a Japanese baby like she was their own family. When the war ended in August 1945, the news came through the camp like a big wave. Japan had made peace. The emperor himself had announced it on the radio. The war was finished. We had not won. Everything we had fought for, everything we had given up, had ended differently than we expected. Some of the women cried. Some sat in quiet shock. Sachiko just nodded, like she had been expecting this. "What will happen to us now?" Harumi asked, holding Akiko close to her chest. "Will they keep us here? Will they send us home? Is there even a home to go back to?" We didn't know. For weeks, we waited and wondered. And then the orders came. We would go back to Japan. We would be given the choice to return home. I felt something I didn't expect when I heard this news. Sadness. Because I was leaving behind the people who had helped me. Not just my body, but my heart and mind. They had shown me that people could choose to be kind, that kindness could exist even in difficult times. On the day we were set to leave, Dorothy came to say goodbye. I hadn't seen her in months, not since we had been moved to the other camp. But she had asked to visit. She brought gifts, small things, chocolate bars, soap, a book of photographs of Hawaii, and for Harumi, a package of baby clothes and a soft toy for Akiko. Emily was with her, translating one last time. "I wanted to see you before you left," Dorothy said, her eyes bright with happy tears. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. I wanted you to know that I have thought about you, that I am happy I got to know you, that I hope you find happiness and peace." I bowed deeply, tears streaming down my face. I had been practicing simple English words that Emily had taught me. "Thank you," I said in broken English, the words feeling strange but important on my tongue. "Thank you for seeing me. Not as someone from the other side, as a person." Dorothy stepped forward and hugged me. A real hug. Arms wrapped around me. An American nurse hugging a Japanese woman. A year earlier I would have thought it was impossible, but now I just hugged her back, feeling the warmth of human connection. Harumi bowed to Dorothy, holding Akiko up so Dorothy could see her one more time. Dorothy took the baby, kissed her forehead gently, and handed her back. "You take care of that beautiful girl," Dorothy said through Emily. "You tell her that she was born in a place where people tried to be kind, even when it was hard. You tell her that matters." We boarded the ship that would take us back to Japan. Back to a country that had been changed by the war. Back to cities that had been damaged. Back to families that might not exist anymore. The journey was long. The ship was full of repatriated prisoners, soldiers, and people from many situations. Everyone looked tired. Everyone had lost something. When we finally arrived in Japan, I didn't recognize it. The port city where we landed was different. Buildings were damaged. Streets were quiet. The people who remained looked tired and sad. I made my way to Tokyo, to the neighborhood where I had grown up. It took many days. Trains were not running well. Roads were damaged. But I kept going, driven by the need to know, to see if anyone was left. My family home was gone, just the ground where it had been and some burned wood. I stood there staring at the empty space, feeling nothing at first. I was too tired, too full of emotion. A neighbor, An old woman I remembered approached me. "Miyuki-san?" she said, her voice weak. "Is that you?" "Yes," I said. "My family?" She shook her head sadly. "The firebombing, early 1945. I am sorry." I nodded. I had expected this, but hearing it still hurt deep inside. "What will you do?" she asked. I didn't know. I had no family, no home, no reason to do anything. But then I thought of Dorothy, of Emily, of Captain Foster, of the hospital in Hawaii, of the choice they had made to be kind, even when it would have been easier to be different. "I'm going to be a nurse again," I said. "I'm going to help people feel better." And I did. I found work in one of the new hospitals that were being built in Tokyo. We had almost no supplies, no medicine, no equipment like the hospital in Hawaii. But we did what we could. We treated people who were sick. We comforted people who were hurting. We tried to bring some small amount of kindness back to a world that needed it. It was hard, harder than anything I had ever done, but every time I wanted to give up, I thought of Dorothy. I thought of how she had treated me with respect when she had every reason not to. I thought of how she had shown me that we are not defined by where we come from, but by the choices we make. And so I made the choice to be kind, to see my patients as important people, not just problems, to care, even when it was difficult. Years passed. Japan rebuilt. Slowly, but it did rebuild. I continued working as a nurse, eventually helping to teach new nurses. I taught them not just the medical skills, but the importance of caring about people, of seeing the person, not just the sickness. I told them stories about the war, yes, but more about the lessons I had learned, about the American nurses who had treated me with kindness, about the power of choosing to be good, even in the hardest times, about how one choice to be kind can change a person's whole life. In 1963, almost 20 years after the war ended, I received a letter. It came from America, sent through Red Cross records. I stared at the envelope, my hands shaking. I opened it carefully. It was from Emily Chen. She had found me. The letter was in Japanese, her handwriting neat and clear. "Dear Miyuki," it read, "I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I have thought of you often over the years and wondered what happened to you. I wanted to reach out because I have sad news. Dorothy Campbell passed away last month. She had been getting older and her health was not as strong. But before she passed, she asked me to find you, to tell you that she never forgot you, that she often thought of the Japanese women she cared for during the war, that she hoped you had found peace and a good life. She wanted you to know that you mattered to her, that caring for you and the others was one of the most important things she ever did. She said it reminded her why she became a nurse in the first place. Not to serve a country, but to serve people and help them feel better. I cried when I read that letter. I cried for Dorothy, for the kindness she had shown me, for the life she had lived. I cried for the connection we had formed in that hospital in Hawaii, in the middle of a difficult war. A connection that had been real, that had mattered. I wrote back to Emily. I told her about my life, about becoming a nurse again, about trying to follow the lessons Dorothy had taught me, about how I thought of her often, about how she had changed my life. We wrote letters to each other for years after that, Emily and I, sharing our lives, our hopes, our memories. She told me about her work as a nurse, about helping soldiers who had come home, about the challenges people of Japanese background faced after the war, about how she had continued to serve, trying to show that people of all backgrounds could work together and help each other. In 1985, 40 years after the war ended, I was asked to speak at a medical conference in Honolulu, a conference about medicine during wartime and the importance of caring for all people. I almost didn't go. I was older by then, in my 60s, and the journey seemed difficult. But Emily wrote to me, encouraging me, telling me that my story was important, that people needed to hear it. So I went. I stood on a stage in front of many doctors and nurses and told my story. I told them about being captured, about expecting the worst, about finding kindness instead. about Dorothy and Emily and Captain Foster, about the choice they made to treat their enemies as human beings, about how that choice had saved me, not just my body, but my heart and my way of thinking about the world. When I finished, the room was quiet, and then someone started clapping. And then everyone was clapping, standing up. Some were crying. After I spoke, people came up to me, they shook my hand, they thanked me. They told me their own stories of choosing kindness in difficult situations. And then an elderly woman approached. She was in a wheelchair, pushed by a younger woman. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Miyuki?" she said. I stared at her. The voice was familiar. The eyes were familiar. But older. So much older. "Emily," I whispered. She nodded, smiling through her tears. "I wanted to surprise you." We held each other. Two old women who had been brought together by war and kindness. We spent the next 3 days together, talking, remembering, laughing, and crying. She told me about her life, about her work, about her family, and I told her about mine. On the last day, she took me to a cemetery, a place where military people are remembered. She led me to a grave. Dorothy Campbell, 1903-1963, beloved wife, dedicated nurse, compassionate person. I kneeled down and placed flowers on the grave, flowers I had brought from Japan. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for showing me that kindness can survive even in the hardest times." Emily kneeled beside me and we sat there together, two old women honoring a third, a woman who had made the choice to be kind when it would have been easier to be different, a woman who had changed lives without even knowing how important she was. I am 93 years old now. Most of my life is behind me. But I still remember. I still tell the story. Because it matters. Because people need to know that even in the hardest times, we have choices. We can choose to be kind or we can choose to be different. We can choose to see others as separate, or we can choose to see them as people. Dorothy Campbell chose kindness. Emily Chen chose kindness. Captain William Foster chose kindness. And that choice echoed forward through many years. It changed my life. It changed how I worked as a nurse. It changed how I saw the world. And through me, it has touched many others. The people I cared for. The nurses I taught. The people who have heard this story. That is the legacy of those people. Not big actions or battles, but the quiet, steady choice to care for someone the world tells you to be different toward. That is what it means to be human, and that is why even now, more than 70 years later, I remember their names. I honor their memory. I try to live like they did, because they taught me that we are not defined by our countries, our uniforms, our governments. We are defined by our choices, by how we treat each other when no one is watching, by whether we choose to be kind or to be different. They chose kindness, and that made all the difference. So when people ask me what it was like to be a prisoner of war, I tell them the truth. I tell them I was afraid. I tell them I expected the worst. But I also tell them that I found something I never expected. I found proof that even people on different sides can choose kindness. That even in war, humanity doesn't have to disappear. And I tell them about a hospital in Hawaii, where American nurses looked at Japanese women and saw patients, saw people, saw human beings, and treated them with respect. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. That was courage. That was the best of what we can be. And that is the story I will carry with me for the rest of my life, because it is a story of hope. A story that says we can be better than hate, that we can choose light, even in the darkness. And that choice, that simple, important choice, can change the world, one person at a time, one act of kindness at a time. That is the legacy of Dorothy Campbell, Emily Chen, and William Foster, and I am grateful to have been touched by it. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power of kindness even in the hardest times, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on how people can choose kindness even in difficult situations. and hit that like button to help us share more true stories from history, because these stories matter. These moments matter. They remind us of who we can be, even when everything around us says we should be something different. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be shared. And they deserve to inspire us to make the same choice those nurses made 70 years ago. The choice to be kind. The choice to care about people. The choice to see the person in front of us, not someone different. That is the lesson. That is the legacy. And that is why this story will never be forgotten.